So I just got back from Denver, and it's been a crazy week, but we're here, and tonight we have Paul Spears, and I'm excited about that. This is actually something that I have not looked at all. I have not even had a chance, but I love the concept of it, and as soon as Paul told me his topic, I was like, yes, yes, please. I love it. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Paul, and Paul, you I assume have slides. You can tell us. I mean, we know who you are, obviously, but for anyone who's not familiar with this channel, you can tell us who you are, and I'm going to let you introduce your topic because it's super cool.
Sure. So hello everyone, I'm Paul Spears. I work for Oasis Digital. We're the folks behind Angular Bootcamp. Tonight, actually, I don't actually have any slides. I'm actually going to be live coding. We're going to start with an empty little project here, and we're going to build up an application together. And so, kind of the idea is we're just going to hang out, be talking about some code, writing some code. Probably learn a little bit of Angular and a little bit of Firebase both along the way. And I'll kind of talk and give a description of Firebase, but other than that, we're going to dive right into some code. So
I like it.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, let's see. So I think this is the right screen. Here we go. How's that?
I see it.
All right. So the app we're going to build tonight is a little chat app. So the idea here is that we're going to start with this, and by the time we're done, hopefully we'll have this. We'll see how far we get. And now the idea, though, is that with this app, if you have two different users in here, as they come in and they type, we can see that update for both users. So I come over here and type back and forth, and they both stay synced up, and they both see all the messages, just like you'd expect from a chat app. And when you're done, you can log out, create a new user, or you can log in, just some of the basics, right? So that's what we're after. Before we dig in, though, we need to talk about Firebase, because Firebase is what we're going to be using for the database that backs this, as well as the hosting. So if you're not familiar with it, Firebase itself, so if I pull up firebase.google.com, is made by Google, and when a lot of people hear Firebase, they think, oh, Firebase, that's that neat streaming database, right? And yeah, it is, but there's actually a lot more to it than that. And so if you kind of like scroll through their homepage here, they actually list like several things like Cloud FireStore, Cloud Functions, hosting, real-time database, machine learning, authentication, all kinds of things that they've got available inside of Firebase.
Can I jump in here with one thing that I want to say? Sure. I have a lot of love for the Firebase team because I remember when I first really started learning about observables, way before I ever heard of RxJS, Firebase was the place where I felt really smart because their interface and their docs, their setup, everything that they had from the very first time I ever touched Firebase just made me feel super successful, you know? Right. So I just have to give a shout out to the Firebase team because they're amazing. And David East, who never takes himself too seriously, and he's really super inspirational and relatable. And so I just got to send them some love.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, and they're just, everything's always clean. Their docs are really, really, really good. Don't let it go to your head, Firebase team.
Yeah, so yes, they have a real-time database. Firebase, they make that available to you, but it's actually a kind of a complete kit for everything you need to back up your client-side application. And so again, if you look right at their homepage, they say that helps mobile app teams succeed. And I don't know really why they say mobile app teams, because really, like, you can use this for kind of any kind of front end you want, any web front end that you want. Yeah, sure, mobile teams, they probably really benefit from it and really enjoy it as well. But there's no reason to restrict it to that. And so when we say Firebase, we're actually talking these days about the whole suite. Like, you can be using Firebase, but not using their database at all. So it's a really nifty set of tools. And tonight we're going to be focused on 3 different parts of Firebase. We're going to see a little bit of the database. We're going to see just a little bit of authentication with Firebase. And hopefully, if there's time, we'll also deploy our app with Firebase as well. So to get started with it, first thing we need to do is we need to make a Firebase project. And so from here, if you click on Get Started, If you're logged in, it will drop you right into this console, this Firebase console. And this is where you go in and you look at all the different Firebase projects that you have, and you can configure them, things of that nature. But we're going to go ahead and make a new one. So here, I'm going to click on Add Project. And I'm going to make this my ngHouston demo project.
Woohoo!
These defaults are fine. I need to accept the terms. And I will create my project. Okay, so let's take a second to spin up. And what we're getting when we have this project is we'll, of course, have the project as itself, but the individual pieces that we might want, we'll have to go in here in a second and we'll start turning those switches on ourselves. All right, so our project's ready, so let's continue. And so it dropped us right in. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger. All right, so it dropped us right in, and it has this getting started here. I'll walk us through that in a moment. I'm going to actually jump straight to the database section. And so if I click on database, we see here that there's some instructions, and right at the very top they say Beta Cloud FireStore. And if we scroll down, we see or choose real-time database. And so if you're not familiar with the tools in the space, first thing you find is, uh-oh, I have some sort of decision to make. And so if you've seen Firebase in the past, when you said Firebase, like I mentioned earlier, that was synonymous with the database itself. Turns out, since their original design, their original Firebase design, they've created a new streaming database called FireStore, and they've technically deprecated their original database. And so they're deprecating their Firebase database, and they're encouraging everyone to use Cloud FireStore. It's in beta right now, but we've been using it for some time. And actually, it's been in beta since October of 2017, apparently. So this is one we're going to go with tonight, and it's kind of what you're supposed to be using as your kind of de facto standard. So let's do that. We'll create our very first database. All right, so right here it's asking, what kind of security do you want? And for the purposes of what we're doing, we're just going to start in test mode. And what this means is that anyone who has access to the API key or has the ability to like make the HTTP calls to this database, they're going to be able to write and read from this database. So you definitely do not want to do this when you're making a customer project or any kind of personal project where you care about the sensitivity of your data. We're just starting in test mode because, as it says, it just gets you set up quickly. All right, so at this point, we're now adding FireStore to our Firebase project. And this is going to be the database that saves all of those messages for our chat app. So what we're going to connect to and save those messages. And then here in a moment, we're going to see how this project is also going to provide authorization. All right, so here's our database. Our database is completely empty at the moment, nothing in it. And the way these databases work is that they're a lot like a lot of NoSQL databases. They're just JSON collections. And in particular, when you have a database, at the very top, you have to start by giving it some sort of collection. And the collection we want is that we have this notion that we have a list of chat messages that have been sent. So I'm going to go ahead and make a collection called messages. Okay, I'm going to hit next. And another interesting aspect of Firebase, in this case FireStore, is that if your collection doesn't have anything in it, FireStore doesn't actually leave it in the database. And so in order for this collection to actually exist, we got to have some documents. So I'm going to seed it with our very first documents. So I'm going to put in here a from key. So this is going to say I'm going to create a new object in our collection of messages. And here I'm going to tell it to please go ahead and just generate a random ID for this object. It's going to have one piece of data, and that's who this message is from. And here I'm going to seed it with an initial value of Paul. Okay, but I want something else. So your chat message is more than just who it's from. It's also got the actual message itself. And this one's going to be a string. That's going to be hello world. I'm going to hit save. And that's it. There's our first document. in our first collection of our FireStore database. So next up, we're going to have to go over and find a way to get access to this database from our client application. So Bonnie, you're going to have to fill in tonight. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns so far?
I mean, like I said, to me, I think that this interface is just super beautiful and easy. And I think the Firebase team did such a good job. And I love, well, I didn't want to interrupt, but I love what you were saying about test mode, because it's like, you don't have to worry about authentication. Just go ahead and fire it up and get it working. And I love that, because then you can kind of just start with something super easy and then kind of add as you go along. I like it. And I'm watching for questions in the YouTube chat. So if anybody's watching and has questions, just throw some questions over there in the chat, and we'll get to those. But so far, no questions, because I think this is pretty intuitive.
Yeah.
Also, it's even more intuitive with you explaining it as you go along. If it wasn't already intuitive, it is definitely. So yeah, keep going. You're awesome.
All right. So up next, we're going to take a look at our application. And so what we've got here is just your standard Angular CLI project. Bump that up the font size there. So yeah, this is just a CLI project. This is the result of me calling ngNew, I don't even remember what app name, but ngNew application. I think this one's a ngHouston demo was this project. And so this is just the boilerplate that they give us. I did make one little change though. I came in and in the app.component HTML, I just stripped that all out and just put in hello world, and then I cleaned out the app component itself. And we're actually going to spend our entire time in the app component HTML, app component TS, and AppModule. That's the only file we're going to use tonight. We're not going to make a bunch of components. If we were doing this for real, I'd probably recommend a few more than what we're going to be using tonight. But I want to keep all the code in one spot just so we're not bouncing around all over the place. I do have another little secret to share though. To make things easier and to make things look nice, I used a few default fonts that I just pulled down off of Google and embedded directly into my project. And one more confession, I'm also using this CSS library. That's going to make things real pretty for me by default without me having to do much work. So all the setup.
I don't know if that's much of a confession. Confessions should be a little more scandalous.
Well, it's not quite an ngNew. You know, I'm cheating a little bit. We'll see. It actually it's a really big cheat. You'll see how much of a difference this little library makes right here. But that's it. That's our application so far. And so if I start this up, it's going to run my Angular CLI for me. I'm going to kick things off. And that is our hello world. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close out my full version of this. I'm going to clear some of these windows out of our way so they don't show up again. And this is what we're going to build on. This is where we're aiming here. So back over in the code, next up, we need to go and grab the tools needed to connect our application to Firebase. And so to do this, we're going to need to grab a couple of packages off of NPM. All right, so the packages that we need, so let me stop my CLI for a second. I'm using Yarn. These same things work with npm install. So if you're not familiar with it, you could do npm install. And what we're after is Angular Fire 2 and Firebase. Or if you prefer Yarn add Angular Fire 2 and Firebase. So Angular Fire 2, this is an Angular library that is an adapter for Firebase. So it's going to expose to us all the functionality we need to connect to and utilize features of Firebase, including the FireStore database that we just got going, as well as the authentication modules that we'll use a little bit later on. And then Firebase is the actual JavaScript library produced by the Firebase team that is used under the hood by Angular Fire. And the reason for the 2 here is much like with many of the other things in the Angular space, there is a JS version of this for AngularJS. That's not what we're using tonight, though. All right, so I'm going to run that, and hopefully I don't drop my connection in the process. Done this a couple times, so hopefully it's cached and goes fast, and we're done.
That was pretty fast.
All right, so now I see in my package JSON that, I see in my package JSON the Firebase and Angular Fire 2 libraries. Now, this makes them available to use in our application. So next step is to actually go into our app module and plug them in. That way we can utilize the services they expose. So that'll be right here in our app module file. And so what we're after is inside of that library that we just brought in. Let's see, that would be Angular Fire 2. They're going to expose to us a module that we can use. It's the Angular Fire module. And that way we can grab the dependencies inside Angular Fire 2. We're going to add that to our list of dependencies for our application module. Now, this will bring in the service, but what we need to do now is we also need to configure it, because I can have one application talking to one of many different kinds of Firebase databases out there. So we need to tell it not only to use Firebase, but what are the credentials, what instance do we need, things of that nature. And the way this is done is over on the actual Firebase console where we set up our database. Over in the top left, there's this gear icon. If you click on this and click on project settings, sorry, not project settings. Yes, project settings. Down here in the bottom, it says add Firebase to your web app. And to make this nice and easy for us, you click this button right here, and it's showing you how you would add Firebase to just a regular JavaScript project. But as it turns out, this object is exactly what Angular Fire 2 is going to be looking for to know how to configure our Angular application to connect to this Firebase instance. If you look, these are the actual API keys, actual project ID. Now, at this point in time, anyone on the internet could go out there and connect to my Firebase and start doing bad things. Please refrain until we're done here.
Oh, it's too late. I already hosted.
So we're just going to copy this. This is exactly what we're after. And we're going to take a trip over to this environments folder. If this is another Angular thing here, that if you're not familiar with this, this is a neat place where you can come in and you can configure different variables, different configuration data for one environment for another. So for example, you might have a QA environment, you might have your local dev environment, you might have a prod environment. Here's where you can specify those environments and give them different information. And so in our environment.ts, this is actually the dev experience. So any variables that we have here are what you'd get at development time. And I'm now going to extend this, and I'm going to add a property called Firebase. I'm going to drop the object that I had copied off of that page right here. And now at this point, my editor is just complaining, saying that, oh, hey, for best practices, really your double quotes, those should be single quotes. So I'm just going to have my editor help me out. I'm going to tell it to just fix all that for me. Of course, it doesn't quite understand what I mean when I say fix everything, so I might have to do it a couple times. There we go. So now that's all happy, and I have a configuration for Firebase to use at development time. So now we go back to AppModule. We've plugged in our Angular Fire module, but it's not quite right. There's one more thing we need to do. We need to ask it to initialize our app. And right here is where we would normally pass it that configuration data. And so I need to go pull that in. So I'm going to import from the environment folder, and in particular the environment.ts file. I'm going to grab from that the environment constant. So again, that was this whole object right here. We're grabbing that whole object, and we're going to use it. And so in particular, we're going to use that Firebase config that we just grabbed off of our website. And we're going to slap that in. And now Angular Fire knows to go ahead and connect to and verify, use those API keys, make sure that we are someone who's allowed to go and talk to that Firebase instance and issue queries against it. Let's save that. So now our app can do that, but we still need the commands necessary to use it, right? And so the way they do this is because, again, Firebase is more than one thing, they break out the different pieces into different modules. So up next, we've got to go get our FireStore module. So up here in my list of dependencies, I'm going to import from Angular Fire 2 / and then now we dig into the individual pieces of Firebase that we want to access. And so it's going to be the FireStore portion of Firebase. And I'm going to ask it to give me the Angular FireStore module. Once I have this module, I just list it right here. And because our Angular Fire module itself already initializes the whole app, it already knows how to now connect to my particular database belonging to that application. All right, so we've now installed the dependencies and we've plugged in the configuration to make our Angular application talk to our Firebase. Up next, I believe we're going to now just start utilizing it. Pausing again for any questions.
I'm following you. I don't have questions. And
good.
I don't see questions on the chat. We have people watching. Cool. We just don't have questions, so keep going.
All right. So I'm going to cheat again. A lot of cheating tonight, apparently. I could write a bunch of CSS, but I'm not going to. I'm going to copy and paste a bunch of CSS instead. So pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
This is like the most like easy, stress-free ngHouston. Like this is super. it's beautiful, and the Firebase thing is like. But it's good because I actually have not looked at this, so it's kind of nice to have you walking through it and showing us how to do it. But it's like so nice.
Well, good. All right. So now we need to actually add our message. So this would be the message that we created before. We now want to be able to fetch that message from Firebase and get it to show up on the screen. And so I'm going to do a little bit of HTML work here to get set up for that. And I'm going to start off with making the header. So if we go back to the running app here and I go to the running example, log back in. So we want a header and a chat box here in the middle. And that's all we're going to go for this one, the header and the chat box. The result of adding my CSS, I need to start my CLI again. Pause for Jeopardy theme. All right, now restart. So our CSS, it gave us this little background here, and that's all it's done for us so far. So now we need our title over here to actually have the Let's Chat title and this box. All right, so let's start with the title. So I'm going to drop in a div, and I want that div to have a class of header. And we're going to start with that. And within it, we're going to have an H1, and we're going to give that a class of title. And I'm going to take advantage of that CSS library and give it a class of float left. This is going to make my title go to the left. And then I'm going to say, let's chat. So saving that. Ta-da, let's chat. Nice and easy. Up next, we actually need the message box. And so for that one, I have a special class here that's going to center my content on the page. And within that, I'm going to add my chat box. Saving that, I now have a chat box. Nice and easy so far. All right, up next, the idea is that we're going to display those list of messages as an actual list. So we need an unordered list on our page, and we're going to print out some list items. Okay, so with these list items, though, we're going to need to bring in an ngFor, and we're going to say for every message that we have of our chat messages. Now, I've not created chat messages yet, but here in a moment, we're going to go over to our TypeScript to create a property called chat messages, and that will contain the list, and we're going to see how to get that from FireStore. But chat messages, that's actually going to be an observable. So we're going to ask our friend the async pipe here to go ahead and take those chat messages and unpack them for us. All right, and then once it does, we'll have a message that we can access, and we can then display who that message is from, followed by the actual message that is contained within that object. All right, so now let's go ahead and make the TypeScript we need to actually get this done.
See, this is what I was talking about when I first, like it was a couple years ago, when I first discovered Firebase, and the first time I tried to set it up. This is like, every time I use Firebase, it just makes me feel like, I got this. Like I could totally do this job, and it's just such a wonderful feeling. And it's like this is like, look, it works like this. So easy.
Yeah. And it really does. Like there are a lot of features with FireStore where you just kind of plug them in and they work, and you set them and you forget them.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right, so up next, we're actually going to have to use FireStore now in our component. So we're going to bring in the Angular FireStore service from Angular FireStore, and we need to use dependency injection to get hold of this. And so here in our constructor, we're going to go ahead and now make I'm going to call it, just abbreviate it as DB for database. And that's going to be one of these Angular FireStore services. But we also need a property for our chat messages. Let's go ahead and drop that in as well. And I said earlier that was going to be an observable. And I'm going to make it just an observable of an any array for right now. My colleagues can shun me later for the fact that I didn't give my data a proper type, but this is this any right here is standing in for whatever the shape of a chat message is. And so for now, again, I'm just going to leave it as an any. And in my constructor, I can set it up and say that the chat messages, that's equal to DB, referring to the Angular Fire service. And I'm going to call collection. And collection is how we actually say, go fetch a collection. You know, not too surprising. And then as our editor is telling us here, we need to give it a path. And this is how to actually reference it in our database. If we go look at our database, we can see that path right here. So this is the path to this particular document. But if I'm just at the messages, our path is simply messages. Okay. And so what this will do is this will actually give me a reference to that collection, but I don't want the whole collection. I just actually want to know about the values that exist inside that collection. And so I can call value changes on my collection to get that observable of my data. So now if I save this and I go back and look at my app, I've broken something. Awesome. Yay, live coding. So this message would have me believe I've done something silly in my template. So let's go take a look.
Better you than me, man.
Ah, yep, right here.
You have to make a mistake when you're live coding, at least one. It's like a rule.
Yep. All right, so there it is. So now I've got my single message from my database showing up in the application. So this is where things start to get really, really cool. So now I'm going to pull up my FireStore console over here on the right, and I'm going to leave my application running over here on the left. I'm going to go into the messages now, and I want to test to make sure that that collection that I got, that it's actually doing as FireStore advertises, which is it's going to leave that connection open, And every time my collection changes, that should then update on the page. So I'm going to start by over here on this messages, I'm going to let's see, add a new document. And so here I'm going to let it pick an ID for me again. And I'm going to say, again, it's from Paul. Add a new field, message. And then there we go. So if I save that, there it is.
Okay, now that's okay. Now you got to stop here, because just in case anybody missed that, you got to do that again, because that's like the first time I did this and it worked. I was very, very, very excited, because you guys pay attention. He's not, well, you're paying attention, I know, but he's not refreshing the page. So when you add, can you do it one more time? Can you add in a message? And then on the left side, there's no refresh. It just pops up. So as soon as you click save on, and you got to warn us so we can watch. Yep. So you're going to click save on the right. And as soon as you click save on the right, it's going to pop up on the left like magic, like Firebase magic.
All right. So 1, 2, 3.
I'm so excited. Woohoo! That was beautiful.
All right. Also, so if I were to come in here and edit a particular value in here, so this is saying watch closely, and then I'm going to just type changed and hit enter. Changed automatically on the left. So where's this coming from? Like, what code did we have to write in order to like get that update? Well, the whole idea is that we didn't have to write any. Angular Fire and Firebase FireStore are working together here to create that live connection all the way to your data store, and then take that any changes that occur and expose them to us as an observable. And observables being the perfect abstraction for something that changes over time. And so we're just piping that directly into our template and displaying it on the page. So that also means if I were to take a input box now and write that data to the database, anyone who's looking at these messages would be able to see them. And that's what we're going to do next. So for this step, right here, let's see, underneath our chat box, I think we'll put it, we'll drop in an input element. That's going to be type equal text, that's fine. I'm going to specify a placeholder, and so I'm going to say type your message here. And I'm going to just start with that and make sure that that makes it onto the page okay. Sure, there's an input box. I don't have anything, any keys bound or anything like that, so it doesn't do anything. But visually, that's there. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a key up event. I'll wrap these so it's a little easier to read. And in particular, I want to bind to the enter key. So this is now, whenever I hit the enter key, it'll execute the following. And the thing I'm going to tell is I'm going to tell it to send a message.
While you're doing this, I gotta jump in there. We say Firebase is super easy because their interface is beautiful and intuitive. And at least for me, I try to be careful of saying this is easy and that's easy, because I've been doing this for a long time, and so I don't want to, I don't want to be condescending and say this is easy. But even when I was a beginner, this was easy, and I just love it. I love Firebase. But the one thing that I would caution you is actually, this was experience from my husband, because he was using Firebase and was doing some development and some iOS development, and he was kind of learning as he was going along, and had some kind of infinite loop somewhere in his logic that he didn't know about. And so if you do that, if you have an infinite loop, or like say you have a key up and you have lots of users beta testing, but you didn't debounce it or something like that, and you have if you have suddenly a huge spike in your Firebase action, you will get kicked up to a paid account. So be careful of infinite loops on Firebase, because you can reach your quota, and then your free account is no longer gonna. You'll get locked out.
Yeah. So like all of the infinite loops that you could have created in your code before, well, now you're connected live to a database, and so your infinite loop is now looping in your database. So
yeah, and now it will cost you money if you're not careful. Okay, we have a question on the YouTube chat. Do you have a minute?
Yeah.
Ricardo wants to know, can we execute search over string in FireStore collections? Like, for example, search a specific message from the chat, which is a really good question.
Yeah, we'll actually see that a little bit later on.
Oh, okay. Stay tuned, Ricardo. And subscribe to the changes of that search query. So like he's saying, you want to watch for like maybe a certain keyword. And even if you're watching before the keyword comes up, as soon as it pops up, you're going to have a notification.
Yep.
All right.
Our example won't be quite that elaborate, but the observable nature of it, like it would naturally like extend to also include what you just described there. So we'll see that a little bit later on.
Awesome.
For now, though, we need to find a way of getting a message in here. And so I'm going to go ahead and add, if you were watching last week, the forms example that was shown last week showed a little bit of this. So if you're not familiar with it, I definitely recommend you go back and watch that from Elaine. But I'm going
Elaine Chattard.
Yep. I'm now going to introduce a template variable here, and I'm just going to give it the name input. It doesn't have to match this. In fact, let me make it something different just to make it clear. I'm going to call it message input. And this is just a way for me to be able to quickly and easily refer to my template elements from my expressions here. And so I'm going to now hand the send message method of my component the HTML input that I've just hit enter on. So here
That's kind of snazzy.
Actually have my input. And this is an HTML input element. And I actually, for a full-blown application, I would really recommend that you go with a full like form solution of some sort, whether it be template or reactive forms. This is just a minimal lines of code approach to kind of get this up and going. But the idea here is that we now need to utilize this input value. And so I'm going to utilize it by calling that same DB property right here. But I'm now within a method. This DB was only exposed to my constructor. So I'm going to take advantage of a TypeScript feature here where I'm going to mark it as private. And by way of marking it private, TypeScript's doing a little wizardry that allows us to access that from other things like our method here. And so now I'm going to be able to call this .db, and I'm going to be able to talk to the collection again. I'm going to talk to the exact same one. I'm still going to talk to this messages collection. Now I'm not interested in the value changes anymore. Now I want to add my own value. And so I'm going to call add. And then I just give it some sort of payload. So I want this to look exactly like the messages that I've put in the previous documents. So I need from here. And I'm just going to, for now, hard code in my name and the message. In this case, is going to come from that input element's value property. So I could start right there. I'm just going to have that. I'm going to come back here and look, and I'm going to say test, and I'm going to hit enter. Uh-oh, I've busted something. Typo. So here I'm looking for messages. I'm looking for the property called message, but I accidentally typed messages. So I'm going to save that. So I now have some bogus data in there. It happens. That's okay. And I'm going to test again. There we go. So now my message showed up, but my text got left behind. So I'm going to make one more change. This collection here, this add method, this is asynchronous. So this actually goes across and makes an Ajax request to the actual FireStore API, and it's going to return back a promise. And so if you've messed with promises before, we know that that's really easy to utilize those. We can call then on them. And when you call then, you give it a callback. So this right here, this is just some shortcut code for saying I want to define a function right here in line, and I'm using this very tight syntax to do that. And so now line 23 will execute once FireStore is done adding the document we just requested. And so now that we know that that's done, we can now take the value of our input and then set it back to an empty string. Save that, and let's try it again. And it did. So our new message showed up, and the value cleared out of our input. All right, so there's another milestone there. If we were doing source control, that'd be another great spot to add a commit.
Woohoo!
So,
sorry, I muted because Samantha brought me bruschetta.
Oh, nice.
But that was awesome.
Had a lovely vending machine dinner tonight.
Samantha stop by here in a minute.
So you've probably noticed at this point, though, that my messages are totally out of order. Like they're just coming back in some crazy random order. No idea like what order it is. And in fact, if I refresh this page, okay, so refreshing it doesn't give you a different order, but certainly typing in and hitting enter, every time I do, it seems to have these values come back in a completely random order each time. So that's a problem. So we're now going to learn how to order our results. That way we can keep the order preserved based upon when these values were changed. But to do that, first thing we got to do is we need to actually add the timestamp to our messages. So back here where we're sending our message, we're going to add a time property to our messages. And I'm just going to say date.now. So it's just JavaScript date method here that we're just saying, give me the current date and add it to my payload for this add call. That's the easy part. The hard part is actually understanding what to do with FireStore in order to be able to order these particular results. So whenever you say db.collection and you give it this path, you can actually specify a second parameter that says, how do you want to order, or are there any kind of conditions you want to check against, with like maybe a where clause to help further narrow down this collection. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and add a order by. And how we do that is by passing in a callback function, and it will hand us a reference to the collection. I'm going to split this up here a little bit, make it a little easier to read. So we've got our messages, and then it's going to accept a callback, and it's going to hand us the collection reference. And then we can use that collection reference in the following way. We can say, take that collection reference and order it by some particular property on the documents. So let's stop there for a second. Bonnie, does that make sense, explaining that bit?
Yes, that does make sense.
Cool. So now, in theory, our collection that we get back, every time I add a new thing to it, it will continue to sort it by the order of the time and give that back to us. So saving that, going and seeing the app, right here, it doesn't give me anything. And in fact, if I check my network tab, okay, good. There's no console errors, so it wasn't a break in the code per se, but something definitely went awry. And that's because until now, we've not actually had any time properties on our values. So if I start typing now.
You just stay so calm. You just go, oh yeah, there's nothing there, but I know why. Usually when people have live coding, there's at least one moment of panic. I haven't heard panic at all. And even when it doesn't work, you're just like, oh yeah, we just need to fix this. Like, no big deal.
Yep. No,
he's cool as a cucumber.
I love live coding. Like, I have a lot of fun doing it. It's like one of the favorite parts of my job, to be honest. All right, so that now works. So if I keep typing, all right, looks like our order is now getting preserved. Deal. So that'd be another good point to go ahead and have that get checked into your code base. So I'm going to fill up the box now, adding more lines until it scrolls. And then one more. All right. So we have a new problem here. This one actually has nothing to do with Firebase or FireStore. It's just a really cool trick I learned when doing this project, and I felt I needed to share it. So over here, the idea is that we would love it if this scroll box here would keep us scrolled to the bottom. That way, as I type new things and hit enter, it would continue to keep us at the bottom. instead of letting that scroll bar continue to scroll up to the top. Turns out with Angular, there's a really super simple one-liner that we can do to achieve this. So over here on our chat box, the trick is to simply know about the fact that Angular has your DOM elements, they have a scroll top property that you can set that says, like, where do you want the top of the scroll bar to be? And it turns out if you set the scroll top to the scroll height of your box, then that will simply force it to the bottom. And so I'm going to use that same trick I used on line 14, where I introduce a template reference right here. And I'm going to use that to say, bind my scroll top property of my chat box to the chat box scroll height.
I love this.
Now,
I mean, I knew the Firebase stuff, but this I did not know. This is beautiful.
Don't say anything yet. It might not work.
No, but I'm so excited.
All right.
I can use it. I didn't know about that.
So if I refresh, it starts me off at the bottom of the page. And new messages keep us scrolled.
That is cool.
And of course, you're free to move from there, but the second a new message comes in, they'll scroll you down to the bottom. For better or worse, like you probably maybe want to turn that off in some condition. I don't know. That was beyond what I wanted to do here, but it's good enough for what we're trying to achieve.
I'm so excited.
All right. So next up, we would like 2 people to be able to use this chat app. So I'm going to open up a new incognito window for a second. That way I can have this secondary persona. And I'm also going to load up my chat app. Unfortunately, when user 2 over here types a message, my messages, they come across to the same person. So we need to get that hard-coded username out of there. So that's where we're headed next. Now, this part can be a little bit longer because there's a little bit more work we got to do. But let's start over in FireStore. All right, so I'm starting to build up some debt here in my windows. All right, here we go, found it. So over here, we have some different options that it presents to us. And one of them is authentication. And so whenever you first arrive, there's no authentication methods set up for your application. And so we now need to do that. And here, if you actually want to use like Google Auth, you can just simply turn it on. If you want to authenticate with Google Play Games, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, etc., those are right here for you. You just need to plug them in. And then there's some help for that you can find to say, okay, now that I have that enabled, how do I actually use that single sign-on method? And you can go find out the details for that in particular. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with email and password. So this is where our users, they'll be able to create a user with FireStore, and we're going to write the custom UI for that ourselves. I'm going to turn on username and password authentication, and you can have more than one. So if you want them to be able to log in with Google, you can turn that on as well. All right, so now our project supports email and password, but we now need to add that to our page. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and, again, this is where we would start to say things like, perhaps we should make a new component, things like that. But for the sake of keeping it all in one spot, I'm going to go ahead and just add this to my existing app component HTML. And the idea is that if I have a user in the system, we're going to display all the content that we've shown so far. If there isn't a user in the system, we're going to want to show, for starters, we're going to show the create user screen. So I'm going to take everything that we have here, and I'm going to wrap that in another layer of div. And actually, no, sorry, I'm going to wrap it in an ng container. And if you're not familiar with ng container, that's just a way of allowing me to put an ng if right here without there actually being extra DOM. So star ng if equals, and I said if a user is in the system, is logged into the system, then go ahead and show this. The flip side of that is I have a div here that I'm also going to put this in the center of the page, and this is where I'm going to put my my create user screen goes here. But I only want this to show up if we don't have a user. Now, we've not defined what a user is yet, so that's going to come here in a second. And so next up, I'm going to go ahead and drop in a form. And so here I'm going to add a form. Add a form. And we don't have any action here because it's not a native HTML form. We got to use just a touch of that form knowledge that we learned last week from Elaine. And I'm going to say when this form is submitted, I want you to create a user. Again, utilizing some template forms. We know that in order for all this to work, we actually have to make a create user form, bind it to our ngForm directive. So this is just some Angular form stuff that we're just needing for boilerplate to make a form work. All right, so within this form, we're going to drop in an H3 and say create a user. Then we need some inputs. And in particular, I need an input to capture the username, password, and display name of our new user. So placeholder, email address, placeholder, password, and placeholder, display name. And then I need to get them added to my form. And so I'm going to use good old-fashioned bananas in a box here. Bind them to our ng model. And I'm going to bind to, again, this is a thing I've not created yet, but I'm going to add it to our credentials object and save it to my email. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm building up a representation of our new user. All right, so to recap, I made a new block of code here to display a form. When that form is submitted, we're going to request that they create a new user. And then I've got some inputs here where I'm going to capture the email, password, and display name that the user types into these inputs. Now our editor is all angry here at us because it knows that there are certain things that we've not done yet to make this work. First is that we actually need a credentials property on our component. And it's going to have, again, the email, password, and display name. So as the user types into here, those values will land in this object. Now we're also going to need a create user method. I'll come back and fill that out here in a moment. We need one more thing, and that is to use these Angular form APIs. We actually need to go back to our app module and tell our application that we like to use some stuff from the Angular Forms API. And in particular, we're after the forms module. And so this will be what allows us to use that form content. Plugging that in and saving it. If the editor gets a chance to reset here in a minute, it'll start to get happy with where these red squigglies are. So let's just save that for a moment and see where we are in our app. And there we go. Lo and behold, we now have our 3 inputs that we'll be able to fill out to create our user. Okay, so of course we also need now a submit button. I want this button to just appear to the right, and I'm going to say this is my create account button. So saving that and looking at the app, we now see create account. Meanwhile, our editor has caught up and it's now happy with our form APIs here. All right, so now we want to verify that our create user method is actually getting called. So I'm just going to drop in a console log. Save that, run the app, bring up my terminal. Uh-oh. So it's it caught an error on me, and it said that, yeah, if you're using that ng model, you have to have the actual name set on your control. So it's not happy here with me. It actually wants me to put a name attribute on my controls. So that's not a big deal. I'll go ahead and do that. So I'm going to give them the same set of values there. So let me save that again, reload. All right, so that's happy. So now if I hit create account, all right, we know that our form is now hooked up and ready to go. Let's do one more check, actually. We're going to say hello from create user, but then we're going to turn around and display this .credentials just to make sure that our inputs got hooked up the right way as well. All right, so we see, in fact, those values are there. Awesome, so that was the Angular part. That was the part where we had to know enough Angular to get a form on the page and get that form hooked up so that we can call submit and do something back in our component. And now we're going to do the FireStore part. And this is where we take that form data and we use it to create a new user. All right, so if you remember back, I said that when we use Firebase, that these different things, FireStore, the user authentication, storage, these are all different aspects of Firebase. I also mentioned that it exposes those with different modules. And so here I brought in the Angular FireStore module to use FireStore functionality. Well, similarly, I now need to bring in the authentication version of this as well. So up here, I'm going to now import from Angular Fire2/auth. And you can probably guess what the name's going to be, but sure enough, we have an Angular Fire auth module. I want to drop that in as well. And so what this will do is this will actually expose to us a second service that is all about FireStore's authentication. And so back in our component TS, just as we brought in FireStore, we're now going to bring in the other half of this, which is located at Angular Fire2/auth. And the piece we're looking for is the Angular Fire auth service. And just like FireStore, we needed to inject that. And just like with our FireStore service, I'm going to call it private. That way I can refer to this thing in other places. And so now this is going to be, let me call this, I'm just going to abbreviate AFA for Angular Fire auth. Of course, it's of the type of that service. So with this auth service in hand, our create user can actually call out to our FireStore authentication APIs. So here I should now be able to utilize that to talk to the auth system. And in particular, I'm going to ask to create a user with an email and password. Here, as you might guess, we're going to now pass it the credentials that we had the user type in, give them the email, give them the password, and for this last bit, the display name, we're going to have to handle that differently. So what this will do is this will go ahead and create our user. And then once that user is created, we're going to need to then update that user with some profile information. In FireStore, when you create a user, it has very little information about them. It's just an ID, email, and then internally it stores the password. But it also has a place for you to say, hey, this particular user has a display name, and they've also got a photo URL. That way, at the very least, you can show their name and an image of them whenever they've logged in. But there's two different APIs we need to use to get all that information in. This creates our user, and then once we've created it, we need to go back and set their profile information. And so much like with the add call, this create user with email and password, this is going to give us back a promise to let us know when this process is done. So we're going to use it in the same way and say, when this is done, it's going to hand us back the authentication piece of information that we need. And so this is actually the user credentials for that we're authorized. So when you create our user, it will automatically log you in and store that information in this auth right here. And we're going to use that, and we're going to say, with this authentication, this authenticated user, we're going to modify the actual user in this authenticated session, and we're going to update their profile. And here I just specify which properties of the profile I want to set. So I want to set their display name. So here's where I get to use the display name credential. And right now it's complaining because you can't just set the one property. You do have to set the whole profile. And so I need to specify a photo URL, even if I don't have one. All right, so with this method, we've created a user with an email and password, waited for them to be successfully created in the system, and we take that authenticated user who's now logged into the system, and we update their profile, passing in the display name. All right, so if I save this, this will let me go back to my form. And in the email address here, I'm going to now fill out my email and then my password and then my display name. And I'm going to create a count. And that appears as though it's done nothing. Well, let's find out. So if that has all worked, I should now be able to come over to my Google Firebase console and click on users. And sure enough, there I am. So that all worked, but of course our application we haven't finished setting it up yet to know what to do with that kind of information. So let's try again. A couple things we need to fix. First of all, that's a classic no-no. So let's go ahead and make it so that it masks our input. That's easy enough. We just need to come over here and change this to a type of password. And if we're being really picky about it, we should probably make this an email while we're in here. Okay, so now if I type, there we go, it's masked for us. Next up, we need to now have our application understand when we're signed on. So this technically worked. This created our user and automatically signed us in, but it had the downside that it only actually told us when we're signed in during the create user process. Later on, we'd love it if we could actually be able to sign in without this and see who was logged in that way. And so that's what we're going to do next. Next up, we're going to, in our constructor here, ask Angular Fire to give us the user as they're logged in. So that's pretty simple. So we're going to utilize the Angular Fire auth service. And here we're going to say, please let me look at the user. And in particular, I want that to be exposed to me as an observable. That way, as the user signs in, the user changes, user signs out, we'll be able to respond to this change here to that user. So in particular, it will hand us the user information, and we just want to stash that here on our component for now. You would definitely want to go back and clean up the subscription and maybe do something more verbose with that. But again, for our purposes, what we're trying to achieve tonight, this is plenty to do. So up next, I need a user for our auth. And as it turns out, Firebase actually exposes a type of user for us. And so we know exactly what kind of data that we're getting back. If you remember, you were asking on our template about when the user was set up. So now, in theory, if I save all these changes, and I come back here, my session from the when I created that user, that was persisted. And so now it just logs me straight in. If I refresh the app, it waits for a moment to get the auth information and then lets me straight in. One more piece to get this part set up. Now we want to make it so that our actual messages themselves come from the user. So now we're going to say this.user dot display name. So if I save this and I type enter, unfortunately I gave this user the same name. So let's come over to user number 2 here and register again. All right, so now we're in over here as well. All right, there you go. Now we have user registration going as well, and we have our filtered list. We have the ability to add new records to that list. We're kind of running out of time though, so we got to wrap this up with one more bit. And I'm actually going to jump to deployment. And so we could add a couple other nifty features. We could show log out, we could show log in, but let's just jump to deploy so we can show this part as well. And so the idea is that Firebase also has hosting for your applications. And if you go back to the actual Firebase page and you're kind of looking around at the features they have, you can pretty easily get from here to the hosting docs pretty quickly. And on their hosting page, on the left, you see this Get Started. It calls it Get Started, but it's like really, it is actually that fast. It's just, here are 5 steps and you're done. Your application is up on the web. So let's go ahead and do those. So step 1 is to install globally the Firebase tools. And so this will use npm to make Firebase a command line tool that we can use. I've already done that, so I'm not going to do that again. Next up, you call Firebase login. And so what this will end up doing is, let me see if I can demonstrate this real quick. 1 second. So here, I'm in my terminal. I'm going to stop my app for a second here. And I'm going to say Firebase log out first because I'm already logged in. I'm going to do Firebase login. And what this is doing is it's actually popping up and asking me, like, with my browser, who I want to log in as. So I'm going to select this particular user, say, yes, Google, you can have all of my data. And then now my console is aware that I've logged in. All right, what's next? So going back to their getting started, next up, we're going to do a Firebase init. So let's go ahead and run that. So here it's going to walk us through this little bit tutorial. And am I ready to proceed? Sure. Now, you got to pay close attention to this. There's one thing in here in particular that if you're using an Angular app, you need to make sure that you hit the right thing. So the first thing it does is it asks you which portions of Firebase you're actually using with your application. Again, be careful here because we are using database, but what they call database is their older database. We're using FireStore, which is their new one. So I'm going to select FireStore, and now I'm going to select hosting. All right. So then it actually pulls down all of your Firebase projects that you have. And so I'm going to tell it to go ahead and utilize my ngHouston demo project. And so here it's going to walk me through a few more basic things. FireStore rules, this is how you get to control who has access to what. That way, if we weren't in that testing mode, we could have fine-grained control over user access.
And Ricardo, this is what you were asking about earlier.
The FireStore index is here. This is where you get to like control a little bit more about the performance characteristics, the capability of searching within FireStore. Next up, it's asking, hey, where do you want your, what public directory should we use from your local file system to push up to our hosting? And this is one of those that you got to be careful because we're in an Angular app. The default is that it actually, I believe it puts it in dist. You need to make sure that we say dist here, or if you've configured your CLI to put it somewhere else, that's what you would type right here. So I've typed that, I haven't hit enter. I just want to demo that real quick. So what we're talking about is if I were to run a yarn run build behind the scenes, it calls ng build. So this is the process where it actually spits it out. It doesn't serve it live. It gives you your production ready bundle. And it created this dist folder, and in it gave me my actual runtime files. So this right here is asking, what is the name of that directory to publish? And dist is the name of that directory. All right, this is another really important one. It wants to know if your application is a single page app because it needs to set up the server in order to support that. And so the default is no, so be very careful. Make sure you specify yes. All right, so that's it. Your application is now compatible and usable with the Firebase CLI. And if everything has gone well, I should be able to say Firebase deploy, and we cross our fingers. Make sure everything was okay. And it uploads our file. It says deploy complete. It says check here for your URL. So I click that and oh no. So it says Firebase hosting setup complete.
Why is that? Oh no. That looks good.
Well, I was hoping to see my app.
Oops.
Yep. So let's check it out. Let's just go back to our Firebase console. So if I, let's see if I go back here, click get started. I'm going to dig back into my ngHouston demo. If I had to take a guess, I'd say I have to come in here and turn it on. So I'm going to go over to my hosting. Nope, that wasn't it.
Well, I've never been this far, so I can't help you.
I'm on my own. Well, let's look close here, see if we can't spot something. Our dist folder here. Ah, looky here. That's strange. It put my index HTML up at the top, but then has this other let's chat folder inside that actually has all my content. So that looks like a weird oddity of the CLI and how the CLI now does projects. And so I just need to change it real quick to use the let's chat folder instead of the dist folder. And so it created for us a config file. So let me see, Firebase JSON is where all of those settings that we typed into that wizard landed. And so here, I now need to tell it serve dist / let's chat. If I save that and deploy again, hopefully we'll get better results this time. All right, let's cross our fingers. Oh no, it's still not working. Oh wait, there it goes. Aha.
I never doubted you. And neither did Ricardo. Ricardo's in the chat and he had the answer, but there's a little bit of a delay, so he knew, but he already figured it out.
Cool. Well, thanks for helping me out there in spirit. I needed it. All right, so now this
we only have one person in the chat, but it's with really good questions. So Ricardo, we appreciate you.
Awesome.
Or one person participating in the chat, I should say.
Yep. All right. So yeah, so here we have a different session than these because these are hosted. This one right here is hosted on my local domain. And so it knows about the fact that, oh, hey, yeah, you've already logged in here. This one here is my actual old running app that we demoed earlier. And this one is on a brand new domain with a completely different session. And so I can still use my original users, or I can make a new one. Test user 2 at, I don't know, AOL.net. I have no idea if that's real or not. I apologize if test user 2 is now has their user stolen. And a password, and now if I hit enter. All right, so now we're logged into our deployed instance. What's really kind of interesting is that here I'm on ngHouston demo.firebase app, and I still see what's typed there here because it's the same backing Firebase instance, even if these apps are hosted in different locations. And so now you can deploy, a mobile app that uses a Firebase instance, the same Firebase credentials as a web app, and they're going to be seeing the same data.
That's so cool. This is funny because this is like deja vu, because I remember a couple of years ago I built a chat app that was very similar to this. I think it was when Angular 2 first came out. Except it took me a lot longer, like way longer than this. I'm sitting here watching you go through each step and then adding authentication and adding this and adding. I'm like, I remember that, but you just make it look really easy. So, yeah. I wish I had this video years ago when I was suffering through this alone.
I was really worried about this part. Having that global URL, I just knew someone was going to come along and type something vulgar into my chat. So we now have a user.
That's awesome. Oh, I like it.
All right, so we're short on time. I got some more stuff that I'd be more than happy to talk to you folks about later on, but I want to respect Bonnie's time here and let her be able to end this on time tonight. So, of course, you feel free to ask some questions. I'll see how I can best answer them in the time we've got.
So eComp is not you. That's just a random person.
Yeah, I have no idea who that person is. I could pull them up and you can see what their email address they registered with is, but if they use the real one, I don't want to show that.
Well, luckily they're well behaved. Luckily for us.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that. Oh, there's Elliot in the YouTube. Does you know Elliot?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. Otherwise, it could be bad. I'm so glad Elliot's well behaved.
Yeah, we've seen Elliot on here a few times now.
Oh, that's awesome. That's pretty quick because I didn't even see that URL because it was too quick. So he was that was a good job, Elliot. That was pretty funny. Well, I think that Ricardo had some great questions, but we answered them as we were going along. So I don't think we have any questions. But I think it would be good for you to tell us one more time where they can find you. And if anyone has follow-up questions, I know sometimes when people come along later and leave questions in the YouTube chat they don't really get answered sometimes. But if someone has questions for you, what's the best way to reach you? Should they tweet you or email you or what? Yeah,
so for just general questions, tweeting at DPS3 is the easiest way to get a hold of me. If you have like questions specific to this particular demo, I have github.com/lets-chat is the repo for all of this, the finished version of this. So you can go there and drop in questions, comments, and the issue tracker there. If more generic Angular stuff, you can actually reach me at paul.spears@Oasis Digital, and that's my work email where we field questions all day, every day about Angular and help folks out there.
And they can hire you guys. Are you Oasis Digital too, or you're just an instructor? Like
no, I'm Oasis Digital proper employee here, and I lead the curriculum for Angular Bootcamp.
Okay, so there's Angular Bootcamp, which is instructors. They have public training and they can do in-house training. And then Oasis Digital is the consulting side. So then you, because I do this kind of same thing, and I have people ask me a lot. I say like, I don't know how to do this. I have this problem. I need your help. And I say, do you want me to do it for you or show you how to do it? And sometimes it's like either one. So it's cool. You guys can do it for them, or you can teach them whatever they like. So that's awesome. Okay, so I think that was great. And I think that was a really great demo. And I really appreciate you coming on and walking us through all that seamlessly. And you made it look super, super easy. So I think I mean, for me, Firebase was always super intuitive, but you just made that whole thing look so effortless.
Well, thank you.
So I really appreciate you coming on and walking us through that. And then next week, I want to give a shout out to Chris Sevaleja. I'm pretty sure I said it right that time. And Otto Kuchik. They're going to be actually here in Houston next week, talking about PWAs, and I'm super excited about that. So
is that going to be online as well?
I don't know if we're going to stream it, because sometimes when we stream the ones that are live, it's kind of crazy. Because I feel like I get confused because I have people in person to talk to, and I have panelists online to talk to.
I understand.
Crazy.
You're looking to keep Chris to yourself. I get it.
I actually I met him before, but I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time with Chris. So my co-organizer Keith is the one who got him, but I actually was hanging out with him in Denver last week, and he's pretty cool. Him and Otto, and I had to make him teach me how to pronounce his last name, and it's Sevaleja. I got that. Oh, and Elliot says we want emojis in the next demo.
So I know.
I can get behind that. Actually, I would support that demand. Okay, so we have Chris coming on next week, and on the 22nd we have a brand new presenter. Josh Hicks is going to come on and teach us about nested reactive forms. And then the week after that, we have Mike Hardington, who's going to come on. And we're going to give him such a hard time for fun, because I love to give Mike Hardington a hard time. So, yeah. Oh, and one more. The first week in September, I believe, we actually have a lot of people who ask me questions about .NET and Angular, and it can get kind of tricky. So we have Jeremy Lickness coming on September 5th. It was kind of tricky to get .NET Angular expert in, but we got one booked, and I'm pretty excited about that too. So, and Paul, hopefully you'll be back, because you're a pretty frequent panelist, and I love having you on as a panelist and all of your Oasis Digital Angular Bootcamp friends. So I hope you'll give everybody say hello to everybody.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight. That was an awesome demo. It was really great. And I will see you soon.
All right. Bye, folks.